This afternoon, we are fortunate to have as guest speaker a leading Australian writer on ethics, Clare Payne. Clare has published 2 books this year. One, Valuing the Single Life, published by Melbourne University Press, and A Matter of Trust, the Practice of Ethics in Finance, co-authored with Paul Kaufman. Clare tracks trends and writes about the implications in her monthly Ethical Lens column in the Australian Financial Review, Boss magazine. In 2007, prior to the global financial crisis, her paper titled Ethics or Bust was awarded the inaugural Ethics and Trust in Finance Prize by the non-profit Observatoire de la Finance in Geneva. In 2010, she helped establish the Banking and Finance Oath, the BFO, a Hippocratic type oath for those working in banking and finance. Clare now works with Dr. Bronwyn King, founder of Tobacco-Free Portfolios, on tobacco-free investment. She is a former employment lawyer and an accomplished marathon swimmer. She holds a Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Communications from Macquarie University and a graduate diploma in legal practice from the College of Law. She has been recognised as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, is a Vincent Fairfax Fellow for Ethics and Leadership, and has recently become an Honorary Fellow of the University of Melbourne. It is a pleasure to call on her to speak this afternoon. Please welcome Clare Payne.
Today in my address, I'm going to talk about endurance, why it matters, why I believe that we all have it in us to endure and succeed despite the obstacles that we might face. I would say that at this point in time, endurance is somewhat out of fashion. Whilst there's some criticism of society's focus on the short term, on the whole, we still laud overnight success. We encourage quick wins and dream of unicorn startups. We idolise instant billionaires, and we praise sprinters. We hope for quicker times and new records. But these moments, these feats, and these people, they are the exceptions. The reality is that some things will take time, and we must endure through hardships, through failures and setbacks to get where we want to be. Among you, I am sure, there will be millionaires, perhaps even a billionaire, but I would argue that this shouldn't be the measure of your success. It shouldn't be your guiding goal, or the way you think about your contribution to the world. And so I turn to endurance. Endurance is the ability to continue, to last, especially when things are difficult. If you have endurance, you can withstand tough situations and recover. With endurance comes patience and acceptance, but most importantly, persistence. Some of the greatest feats of humanity have required endurance. We have advanced as beings only because those involved had persistence and endurance. We need only think of our great explorers, enduring months at sea, crippling illnesses, and homesickness so acute they thought it was a contagious and fatal disease. We see endurance in other fields as well. We've had medical advances that have changed our lives. We need only think of vaccines to realise how much we owe to teamwork, persistence and endurance. The idea of vaccinations was first introduced in 1796, and subsequent scientists built on the findings and have saved many of us from early death. From the University of Melbourne, alumni Professor Ian Fraser was the leader of the groundbreaking Gardasil vaccine. These medical professionals have dealt with criticisms, setbacks, and inconclusive studies along the way, but they have persisted, they have endured, and we should be grateful. It's through endurance that we get an insight into the human spirit. From the prisoners of war who faced deprivation, starvation, and were dehumanised in every way possible, and yet they survived because they endured. Every so often we hear about inspiring feats of endurance that test the strength and human spirit. A human has spent 73 days living underwater, another 338 days living in space. Someone has spent 264 hours without sleep, and another person has spent 86 hours running continuously. There was Aaron Ralston, who severed his own hand to escape a climbing accident that left him trapped for 5 days between two boulders. And there's those that survive against all odds. Julianne Kopek, she was the sole survivor of a plane crash in the Amazon, and she wandered through crocodile-infested jungle for 9 days until she was rescued. And of course we have Lincoln Hall, who was literally left for dead on Mount Everest and survived. But you might wonder, could I handle that? Do I have it in me? Well, I think you do, and I think amazing survival stories actually extend to babies. We are born to endure. When we think about contributions to the world through persistence and endurance, examples abound from the University of Melbourne. Through a notable alumni, a former Prime Minister, the Honourable Julia Gillard, the former Human Rights Commissioner, Professor Gillian Triggs, and long-respected philosopher Peter Singer, who's changed the way that many people think about the world over decades and decades of contribution. Ahead, you might face endurance of a different kind. You might have to endure to get your voice heard, to get funding for an idea, to get voted in, to change something you think is wrong in the world. There were over 22 unsuccessful attempts to recognise same-sex marriage under federal law in our country before it was passed. And don't even start me on how long it took women to get the vote. Some women are still waiting. To turn to the world of finance, it has taken decades for climate change to be considered an investment risk, for fiduciary duty to be about more than just financial returns. It has taken a long time for those in financial markets to talk about responsible investment and sustainability. But for all these advances, people have had to persist, to be tolerant, and to endure. Endurance has been a theme of both my personal and professional life. In the year 2000, I was 24 and I watched the Olympics in my hometown of Sydney, and I got inspired. I wondered, could I ever go to the Olympics? Was it too late? The only thing I was any good at was swimming, but I was not a sprinter. I'd done some swims, 1 and 2 kilometres, but I didn't win or even rank. But feeling inspired, I decided to swim the Rottnest Channel in Western Australia, a distance of 20 kilometres. When I first read about the swim, I felt nervous. When I first told someone I was thinking of doing it, I felt ridiculous. But I set a plan, I trained, and I did it. It was a feat of physical endurance for me. On the day the conditions were bad, the Fremantle doctor, which is a howling wind that usually comes up in the afternoon, was up before the sun rose. The swim went ahead, but 75 swimmers pulled out before the start. 215 were rescued at the 5-kilometre mark, and a further 240 at the 10-kilometre mark. Of the 170 solo swimmers that started, only 66 finished, and I was number 66. I was the last official swimmer to cross the line. The swim took me 9 hours and 42 minutes. Before the event, I had only swum 3 hours. I never would have thought I could swim for that long. 3 months later, I went to America with a goal to swim around New York City, a distance of 46 kilometres. This was a frightening goal. When I arrived in New York, I couldn't look around the streets because I knew as far as I could see in every direction, I would have to swim. But I did it in 15 degrees water I found so cold that it made my hands splay, so that it made it difficult to get proper grip in the water to swim. It took me 8 hours and 32 minutes. But what these swims taught me about endurance and capability as a human still sits with me today. I'd always been called small, diminutive, and fragile. I was never referred to as strong or even sporty, but I became an endurance athlete because I planned, I trained, and I endured. I see my professional career as an endurance event as well. As you know, I work in the area of ethics in finance. If ever there were an area that requires endurance, this might well be it. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to say that we have a truly ethical financial system, but I think we must persist in trying to achieve it. We have pressing global issues, from climate change to poverty to gaping inequality, and all these issues require the assistance of finance and people like you who might join the sector. There is an opportunity for you to contribute, to help create a better and fairer world. When I first had a role in the Integrity Office of an investment bank, people laughed about those words going together. Now it's common. When I first talked about creating a Hippocratic Oath for bankers, people thought it would never take off. Now the CEOs of our major financial institutions are signatories. When I first worked in tobacco-free investment, it was standard practice for superannuation funds to be invested in tobacco stock. Now the majority of funds exclude tobacco. All these steps have required endurance, a belief in the bigger picture, and a belief that I have something to contribute, something that I can do to create a better and fairer world. On a more personal level, I always wanted to be a writer from the time I was very young, yet it wasn't until this year that I became the author of 2 books, one with Professor Paul Kaufman, and at 20 years after graduating with a degree in journalism, I got my own column last year in the Australian Financial Review. So as you think about what lies ahead for you, I encourage you to think big and to think long term, to think about enduring legacies, to lasting change, and to great contributions. Your experience with endurance has already begun because you are graduating. Many people cannot apply themselves to the task of finishing at university. As you go ahead from here, I encourage you to persist, to be patient when needed, to be accepting when required, but to draw on endurance to contribute to a better world with the knowledge you now have from your studies completed at the University of Melbourne.